Hi everyone. In this video I am going to explain log4j mechanism in Java. Basically log4j mechanism is used to debug the application. It is very useful in finding the issues in your application, and generally we use system.out statements to see the runtime values of an variable or to see if the method is entered or not for debugging purpose. But if you use the system.out statements, the performance will be degraded. So all the debug statements that we have added for our debugging, we have to remove them and send the code to the production system. Production system is the real one which users use. That you should not add those debugging statements in the production system because that will degrade the performance. So what we have to do, all the system.out statements we have added at our development time, those should be removed before sending the code to the production system. But after testing is completed, and if you want to remove all those code, that's a time consuming process. Maybe there are hundreds of system.out statements added in your project, and if you want to remove them after testing is completed, if you make any mistake, you have to retest the entire application. So in real time, using system.out statements and removing them when you are moving that code to the production is not a feasible solution. So we need a mechanism where we can add the debug statements, and by simple configuration change we have to disable them before moving that to the production. So that is the advantage of using the log4j. So in log4j we can add the debug statements, but while moving the code we can simply change the configuration file and we can disable them. So let us go into detail how log4j mechanism works. Okay, I have developed a simple registration and login functionality, and in that I have added the log4j mechanism, and I will go through that example and explain you in detail about the log4j mechanism. So if you see this code, in log4j mechanism there is an object called logger. Okay, so instead of using system.out statements, you will call the methods on the logger object. So in the logger object there are different methods like logger.debug, logger.info, logger.warn, logger.error, logger.fatal. So instead of using this system.out statements, you can use any of the methods from the logger object. As I said, in the logger object there are different methods like debug, info, warn, error and fatal. So what we have to do is, whatever the statements we want to add for our debugging purpose, use debug method. So if you want to see if this method is entered or not, this is not an error, right? This is for our debugging purpose, just to know that if this method is entered, to understand if everything is working properly. So instead of, so we have to use this debug method of log. Log is a instance of the logger object. Instead of using system.out statements, I will explain what is this get name and all those things, but there is an object called logger. We have to call the debug method. Okay, so we have used the debug method instead of system.out. The advantage is these statements we don't remove while moving the code to the production. By simply changing the configuration, we can disable these debug statements. Let us see first. There is a debug statement, and we have to say whenever there is an exception, instead of using debug, since this is an error, we have to use the error method from the logger object. So log.error, error in obtaining connection. Okay, like this, instead of using system.out, we will use debug or error. Debug is for debugging the code, but error means to report or to write the information to about the issue. This is an error, right? If we are not able to get some database connection, it is an error. It's not a debugging. So whenever we add something, we use debug if it is for our debugging during the development time. Okay. Now if you add the system.out statements instead of this logger.debug, when you move this code to the production, you have to manually remove that. But instead of that, in a properties file, you can just specify that I don't want these debug statements to be printed. Okay. Now we will go into detail. So let us run. Basically, this code is a simple login page. Whenever you hit login, it will the control go to the login servlet. Okay, then I retrieve the email and password and I check whether the user is a valid or not. See, I have written debug statement. That means to see if the servlet is called or not. Sometimes what will happen when we click on login, we don't get the result as expected. So at the time you can use these log statements and see if the servlet is called or not. So that's why I have added one debug statement here. As I said, log is an instance of the logger object. So you call the method debug. So wherever required. So after that I am checking if the user is valid or not. So during my development time, I am printing to find out if this user is a valid or not. So that's why I used the debug method here. So basically here one debug statement, another 2 and 3. And if it is a valid user, I am forwarding the control to the home page. So just for debugging that the flow is redirecting to the home page, I have added another debug statement. So totally 3 here and here 1 4. So you can see that at many places we have added the debug statements, right? So 2 3 here. Okay, but if you add these statements into the production system, your system will become slow because these are not necessary, right? During development time, it is required to know if this method is entered or not, but in real time, when the code went to live after testing, no need for these things. But we have to retain these error messages because if some issue is reported by the user, we can go to the logs and see that something went wrong while obtaining the database connection. So by going to the logs, we can see the error messages, but no need of these debug messages. Okay, let us run this. So if you see, when I hit login, the control will go to login servlet. Okay. If you are a new user, register. Okay. So log in with the registered presence. Can you see? So when I click on the login, the control reached here. So instead of system.out, what I have done is I have added the debug. So let us go into more details of debug. Basically, to configure or to use the log4j, we have to create a, there are several options. One is using XML file and another is properties file. In this video, I am explaining using log4j.properties file. Create a properties file. Okay. So as I said earlier, what we are doing, we are calling methods on logger object, right? At the root, there is one object called root logger. We have to configure this logger object details in the log4j.properties. Basically, what we have to specify is specify the debug level. I will go into detail what is this debug level. There is something called specify debug level. If you see for the root logger, when you want to use the log4j mechanism, you have to configure the root logger object. This is a root logger object, so you have to say log4j dot root logger. That means for the root logger we are specifying the debug level. This is the level I am talking about. You have to specify the debug level, right? If you see, there are many levels in log4j: all, debug, info, warn, error, and pattern. So we will see the difference between these levels. For now, for the root logger, I have specified the debug level. Can you see? So I have specified the debug level. Okay, and then you have to specify the appender. You have to give a name for the appender. Basically, the purpose of appender is where these log statements should be redirected. See, here I have added, when you say system.out, that will go to the console, right? But in log4j, the statements can be redirected to multiple destinations. Means you can redirect to the console, means that will be printed here like system.out statements. But if you want to redirect these statements to a file, you can specify file appender. Understand? Basically, the purpose of appender is where this content, you are writing something, right? If you use system.out, this content will redirected to the console, means it will get printed here. But in log4j, you can specify whether this message should be redirected to the console or to a file. So basically, you have to give the name for the appender. Okay, for this root logger, I have specified the debug level, and for the appender, I have given a name called JL, means Java learners. I have just given some name. Okay, this is just a name, but still we did not mention whether we need this appender to be redirecting to the file or console. So now in the second step, you have to specify log4j dot appender dot jl, means for this appender. Okay, for this is the name, right? We did not specify whether we have to redirect to the file or console so far. So now in this line we are specifying for this appender name, use file appender. You have to say log4j dot appender dot jl. That means for this name, use the appender, means for jl the appender is file appender. Understand? So you have specified some name for that. So for the the appender for this app name is a file appender. You can say console appender also. Now in this log4j, I am specifying that my log messages, means this content should go to file instead of displaying on the console. That's what the purpose of specifying file appender. So when you want to redirect to the file, you must save the file name, right? That's what I'm saying here. So log4j dot appender dot jl, that means you are specifying for this appender, file is a property. So for appender called jl, there is a property file. So for this appender, the file you have to use is jldebugfile.log file. Understand? So basically what we are saying, for the root logger, you have to specify the level. We will go into details about levels later. First, now in that must be one of these levels. Currently I have given debug. Okay, now I have to specify the appender name, and then for this appender you have to specify if the content should be redirected to the file or a console. In this example, with this statement I am saying that for the appender JL I have to use the appender called file appender. That means the contents will go to file. So log4j mechanism, you have to, for log4j mechanism you have to specify now the file name, because this is a file appender. You have to specify the file name to which the content should go out. So we have specified a file name called jldebugfile.log file, and then while printing the statements, while printing these statements you can print the time or the method name. Okay, this is do post method. So if you say percentage m, it will print do post method. So you can basically you can specify the layout of the line. That means you can specify the time when this method is executed, what is the class name, what is the method name, what is the thread name, and all these details you can specify here. It means pattern layout. There are different layouts. So basically with this line what we are saying is, for this appender use the layout called pattern layout. Okay, there are different layouts like HTML layout. That means the contents will be printed in HTML format. Here I am not using HTML format. This is one layout called pattern layout. Just like appenders, there is a file appender and console appender. In the same way, their layouts can be different. I am in this example I am using pattern layout. Okay, and we have to specify a format like this. Means percentage m means the log message, and percentage n means once the log one line is printed, you have to give the new line character. Okay, percentage 4r means log level, whether it is 1 or log and other. Percentage t means thread name. Like this, there are many different things we can easily configure. Let us see an example and then we will understand. Okay, now you can see that now see, I click on login. Okay, now let me restart once. Can you see? I have specified that the contents should go to a log file with the name jl debug file, right? So if you see the file, a file is created with the name jl debug file. Can you see? Can you see? Forwarding to home page, all these contents. Now if you see, all the statements I have used came from here. If you see, entered login servlet do post method, can you see that line will be there? Entered login servlet do post method, then got connection, got connection successfully, is valid query, I am printing the query, and all these are debug statements. These are for debugging the application. Okay, now you can see what is the use of this one. Layout means, if you see, compare this one, compare the content with this one. See, basically percentage t means what is the thread name, something like that, and percentage 5p means this is the debug, right? That's why it printed debug. And then percentage c means the class name. See, get connection. Where is this get connection method? Can you see dbutil? Right now, you ask to log the statement, but if you see the output, how it printed, it not only printed entered get connection, it printed many things. It is because we have given the pattern here along with percentage m is the content you have asked to log, that is this one. Percentage m is the content we have asked to log. Along with that, we asked to print percentage c means class. Okay, the log level and all this. If you read about these conversion patterns, you can easily understand. If you interchange, see right now entered get connection, this is printed lost, right? If you remove this from here and place here and restart, and you will observe the change. Remember, the log message printed in the end of the line, right? Now I have asked to place it at the beginning. Now I will restart and see the result. You will understand the difference. Okay, now if you see the content, let me remove these files so that you will understand clearly. Let me stop the server and okay, now I restart the server. Okay, now we will see the content. Can you see? Earlier the message we have logged was at the end of the line. Now since you changed the pattern in the log4j properties, you can specify where the message should be printed. When you say percentage m at the beginning, so the log message will be printed first. So by specifying the format here, you can change the how the content is displayed. Okay, debug, this is called debug. This is printed. Now percentage n is new line, percentage x, this is the thread name, this is the class name. So if you read these conversion patterns, you can use according to your requirements. Okay, now I will explain what the level means. See, basically for the root logger you have specified the level called debug, right? So if you see, instead of system.out statements in the code, you will use either logger.debug or logger.info. Debug is for debugging purpose. In exception blocks, you will add a method called logger.error. So currently what I have specified for the root logger, I have specified debug level. Okay, here I have specified debug level, right? Now let me stop the server. I will remove the content, but before restarting I will modify this to error. Okay, and restart. Now observe the content in the file. It is surprising, right? No content is printed. It is because in log4j we can enable and disable the statements based on some priorities. Means these are the things, right? Logger, if you specify debug level in for root logger. That means what will happen if you specify debug level logger.debug debug statements, logger.info, logger.warn, logger.error, logger.fatal will be printed. Understand? Any statements. So if you specify debug, that means only the logger.debug, logger.info greater than or equal to this level. If you specify debug, logger.debug statements will be printed because this level matches with this one, and the levels which are greater than this level and equal to this level gets printed. So logger.debug statements get printed, logger.info get printed, and all these are printed because you have specified debug. But if you specify error in for the root logger, what happens is only those methods which are greater than or equal to this level gets printed. Since debug is less than error, remember this is first ascending, think like this. If you specify error in the log4j properties, only the levels which are greater than or equal to that method gets printed. So error means only error and fatal levels get printed. Since debug level is less than error, error is here, and debug which is less than error, so that is the reason debug messages are not printed. Can you understand now? During the development time you will specify debug level in log4j properties. Then what will happen? All the statements which you have added for the debugging purpose. So when you specify debug, all the levels greater than or equal to that level printed. So during the development we set debug level in the log4j properties. So all the methods which use debug, info, warn, error, but so basically everything gets printed except. Okay, now if you when you move your code to the production, what you will say, just make it error. So unnecessary information won't get printed, because when you say error, only the levels error and fatal gets printed, so debug won't be printed. So by that way we can disable all the statements which are not required in the production system with simple change in the log4j properties. I think you understand, right? Now can you see? But since there is, you have enabled the error level, but nothing got printed in the file because there is no error so far. Let us do one thing. We will create some error. What we'll do is we will intentionally remove the create the error in the URL. I am not specifying the database name. So now an error comes. Remember, in the log4j properties we have specified error level. That means what will happen now? Only the methods logger.error and logger.fatal gets printed, because only the levels which are greater than or equal to this level gets printed. So error and fatal gets printed. Any debug statements, info messages, warn and all won't get printed. Now I want to see if I specify error, does it print error messages or not. So I want to check. So what I have done, I am intentionally creating in the properties file, I am reviewing the database name. So it will create an error because it cannot get the connection because the URL is wrong. So let us see. I will remove the log files. Let us stop that before removing, otherwise it won't let you deleting. Okay, I have removed it. I have specified, I have intentionally given wrong URL to create the error, and then what I have in the log4j properties, instead of debug I have specified error level. Okay, now let me restart. Now open the file and see if there is any content. I think not a server is started. Nothing got printed. I have given error, right, for the root logger. Okay, I did not access the application, that's why the error, this message. Only when you try to hit the login server, then it will try to obtain the connection, right? That is the reason no messages were logged yet. Now see, now we will see the files. Can you see? Entered get connection. No, why still the debug messages got printed? Okay, let me stop once again. Now we will go to here and see the content. Can you see? Error in obtaining connection. Sorry. I'm seeing why this statement got printed. This should not get printed because we specified the error level, right? Okay, now I understand. Because this is the root logger, right? And for the util, see, we can specify. Now we will see this description. There is something called root logger. You have specified debug level, error level, right? Now, but you can configure different files and different levels for different packages. So for org.jl.dao you can specify a debug level, and you can specify appender, and you can specify layout. That is the reason. If you see the log4j file, see, this is the root logger, and in the log4j for org.jl.dao, if you see, there is a package called org.jl.dao. For my packages I can define my own level instead of error. Okay, that is the reason. If you see this, for the package org.jl.dao, if you don't specify debug for org.jl.dao specifically, then it will use the configuration of the root logger. See this diagram. If you don't give, suppose if you don't give these three things for this package, by default the information given here will be used. So since this is the root logger, since you did not specify anything for this, it will try to get the details based on root logger. But if you specifically mention the debug level and appender and layout for this package, then these will be ignored. Means like overriding for this package, use this debug level, use this appender, and use this layout. Okay, that is the reason. Since error is for root logger, but if you see for the org.jl.util, I have for the package you can ask to override the root logger. Means I don't want the level given here for my package called org.jl.dao, use the debug level. Okay, and you can specify the level and you can specify your own appender. Don't use JL for package. Means for all the classes in this package, use a debug level and use the appender called Diego. In the same way, you can specify appender. There is something called for root logger you have used file appender, right? There is something called a rolling file appender. So for this package, level is debug. That means all the statements that are greater than or equal to debug level. That means debug method will be printed, info, and all this will be printed. Okay, there is something called rolling file appender. That means when the file exceeds 20 KB, then another file will be created. Okay, if you see this, use this file appender, this file will become lengthy because you did not specify to roll the content. So if you use the roll, the advantage of using rolling file appender is once the size is greater than 20 KB, it will create copy of the file and will create into the original file. Okay, so this is the maximum size. Okay, that means if you don't specify this configuration, then for this package, means for the classes in this package, the same configuration of the root logger will be used. Okay, if you specify specifically for your package, then it won't use the root logger information. If you see, this is for package called org.jl.dao. Next, I have specified for the util package org.jl.util, use a debug and appender called file appender, but now I am using HTML layout. Okay, that means the content will be printed like this. Can you see? Since there is an error, can you see? Since there is an issue in a database, earlier the contents were printed in file, right? But now it is using HTML format because the reason is for org.jl.util I have specified debug level and appender name called util. For this appender I have asked to use file appender. That's fine. For the file appender you will specify generally file name, right? But now I want to use HTML layout. That means the contents will be printed in HTML format instead of normal file format. Earlier we used pattern layout, but for the classes in the package org.jl.util I have asked to use HTML layout. So if you see the dbutil, there is an error while obtaining the connection, so it will print the error messages. Okay, but for this org.jl.util I have asked to use the HTML layout. That is the reason it created a file called, if you see I have specified the file name jl.util.html. Okay, that is the reason created HTML format. Okay, now see. So for the package org.gl.util, I have asked to print debug. So in this, all the classes in the org.gl.util uses debug level. That means all the debug lines will be printed, and all the, you can see the hierarchy. If you specify debug, so basically if you don't give the level, appender and layout information for the packages specifically, then the information given for the root logger will be used. Okay, but if you specifically give the debug level and appender and layout information for your package, then this level, appender, layout information won't be used. This configuration will override this root logger information. That means for all the classes in the package, the level specified here will be used. This will be ignored. Suppose if you say error here and if you say debug here, this error won't be used. Debug will be used. That means all the methods which are greater than debug or equal to debug will be printed. That means if you specify debug level for package org.gl.util, then that means all the methods greater than or equal to debug method will be printed. So debug messages will be printed, info, warn, error and fatal will be printed. So this configuration will override the root logger information. That is the way. If you want, in real-time projects there will be different modules. So what we will do generally is, for each module we will give a separate file, so that when there is an issue in one module we can directly go to that log file and see that. If you don't specify log file for a module or package, then everything will be written to a single file or single appender. So the file will become lengthy and it is difficult to find the issue. So you can configure the file per package. So for this module use this file, and for this package use this error level and this file. So you can create different files for different packages, so that debugging information will be spread across multiple files, so that you can easily find the issue. Okay, now we will see how to basically get the logger object. Okay, earlier I didn't show how we got the log instance, right? Just we have to call the logger. Logger is a class. Just call getLogger method and give the, you can say login servlet dot class dot get name. Okay, see this login servlet is in org.gl.servlets package, right? If you configure specifically any level for this package, then that information will be used. See, if you take the dbutil, when you ask to get the logger, you have given logger.getLogger and you have specified dbutil.class.getName. Since you have configured for the org.jl.util, you have asked to use jlutil.html layout. Understand? So when you ask a logger, then it will use the information given for org.jl.util. Okay, that is the purpose of specifying the class name. By default, if you don't specify any configuration for this package org.gl.util, then it will use the configuration from the root logger. Means this configuration will be used. If you specify the configuration explicitly, see here for this package, this information right? So for all the classes in this package, they will ignore this configuration, and all the classes in the log4j.jl.util will use this configuration, they will ignore. For rest of the classes, it will use this root logger information. Okay, so basically what you have seen file appender, and you can use console appender. If you use console appender, you need not specify the log file, because that will be redirected to console. Now you have seen rolling file appender, means once the file size exceeds 20 KB, it will move the content to another file. And like rolling file appender, there is something called daily appender. That means for every day it will create a new file. Okay, you can check that later while you practice. So basically I am giving information like there is another appender called daily appender that will create one file each day. Okay, now but who will read this log4j properties? So we have to, there must be something which reads this configuration. So that is called log manager. So we have to start the log manager, then only this configuration will be read by the log manager. Okay, if you see, I have written a listener, context listener, and here I have called property configurator dot. See, basically I have kept the log4j properties in classes folder, right? So when I ask context.getRealPath, then it will give the path where my web application is deployed. When you say context.getRealPath, it will specify the path where my web application is deployed. So in Java Learner's web application, in classes, this properties file will go. So I have specified this properties. Where is that? If you see, I have just printed for your information. I have intentionally printed this information. When you specify context.getRealPath, it will give where your web application is deployed. So here it is deployed. So if you see, and what is the log4j config file? In the web.xml, I have specified the path where my log4j is located. I have configured a servlet context parameter. If you see, log4j location. So in WebINF classes, I have kept the log4j properties file. So I retrieve this context parameter in the listener. Okay, and I pass. See, basically you have to call this method so that this log manager will read the log4j properties file, and only if you call this log4j mechanism will be up and ready. So to start the log4j, you have to give the path where the properties file is. So there is some, we are using properties file, so we are using property configurator to configure the log4j mechanism. What we have to say, for the property configurator, call a method called configure and give the full path where the log4j mechanism is there. Where I have kept, since I have kept the log4j in properties in src file, it will go to the classes. So I have to get the path where this web application is deployed. When you say context.getRealPath, it gives the path where the web application is deployed, and then I have appended the config file location, means log4j, where this is retrieved from web.xml. So basically here in the Java learners and WebINF classes, my log4j property is there. So once this line is executed, log4j mechanism is up and ready. Okay, you can specify hard-coded paths like C:test, like that, but I don't want to hard code. I want to specify where my log files should be created. That's why you can specify, instead of hard coding c colon test slash log file, I can configure dynamically. So you can say, using system.set property, you can specify log path value. So basically, in the Java learners, in the logs folder, the log file should be created. If you see, so I'm asking to create the log files. When you say context.getRealPath, you will get path up to here. This is called context.getRealPath, and I am appending logs. So I am asking to create the log files at this location. So the log files got created here. Instead of using like this, you can directly hard code, but I don't want to hard code. I want to dynamically create the log files at the specified location using system.set property. You can, so for this log path, I have asked to create at Java learners logs folder. So this log path you can use here using $log path. Okay, hope you understand. Thank you.